Hello, this is Glenn Yancey with InSource Solutions. Today I will be presenting a video on pulling up discrete tag statistics in your Historian client. So our Historian client already has some pre-built queries inside of it to help return back time and state information, and maybe also give us a glimpse of how many times has a discrete device transitioned between states. The Historian Client query is the utility that we're going to use to pull back that information. So let's get an understanding of my application. My application contains a water valve, concentrate valve, and a steam valve. All these valves are letting in ingredients, but I want to focus on my concentrate valve, which is currently in my Historian. I don't necessarily care at this stage when it turned on and when it turned off. I'm more interested in how many times did it cycle, and maybe what was the percentage of time that it was in an off state versus an on state. So let's look at my trend. My trend shows me the pattern of when things went on and when things went off. I only care about 15 minutes worth of data, and that's going to be between 2:30 and 2:45. I set this trend between 2:15 and 3 o'clock so that I can place my sliders around 2:30 and the 2:45 mark. Now, to get statistics, there is a statistic function in the trend itself, but in this scenario, it doesn't necessarily tell me exactly what I'm looking for. I want to see the individual states of my concentrate valve. I want to see information of when it was on, when it was off. To do that, I would use the Historian Client Query utility rather than the Trend utility. In the Query utility, I would first choose my tag with the same interface that I have for my trend, and then choose my state statistics query type rather than the traditional history values. I'm focusing on statistical information for this tag and its states. 0 signifying off, 1 signifying on. So that is the first column, the value column. My time is being configured for 2:30 and 2:45 as my start and my end time with a 15-minute duration. So going back to columns, my value column signifying 0 and all the pertinent information for that, and the next one signifying 1 for that next row in my value column, signifying the information of when it was on. For 0 or off, I see that it had cycled 13 times. It has also been roughly 4 seconds as the minimum amount of time that it was in an off state. The max was closer to 90 seconds that it was in an off state as its maximum amount of time. If we go down below, we see the 1 there showing when the concentrate valve was in a true state or in an on state or open. It had cycled 12 times. The minimum amount of time, which this number is in milliseconds, that it was in an on state was roughly 11 seconds. And the same thing for the max, which is also roughly 11 seconds. The next column that we have here focuses on averages. Roughly 59 seconds average of my concentrate valve being in an off state versus 11 seconds for being in an on state. The next one focuses on time total. This is also in milliseconds, and you would have to calculate that to see how many minutes. And here's another concept that we have here. It's taking the time total, but it's introducing this word called contained. Contained means that it has to truly cycle on, then off for it to count. If we were to look at my trend, we're going to see data here that's listed that unfortunately we're going to get rid of. And the data that we're going to get rid of is this first part when it was off. The only time that we really would focus on this data, because it's contained, is when it had cycled on and off. So I will disregard this time that it was in an off state down below and go immediately to where it had cycled on. For it to truly be contained, it has to cycle on, then off. Now there's a little bit of time when it had gone back off towards the end, around the 2:45 mark. So that little bit of time that it was in an off state, I'm also going to disregard that until I get to the very first time that it went to false. Now this is considered contained, again, ignoring the information of when it had not properly cycled on and off. In my query, it shows me what that amount of time would be. Very little difference on the on. In fact, there's no difference, because that's what it really is looking for, is the on state. Now, what if that time period or that slider was right on at the 2:45 minute mark, right on when it had gone on? Unfortunately, this would be completely disregarded down below. We wouldn't care about that information anymore. We would just go back to when it had finished cycling into that state. So again, that is what contained focuses on. You're going to have a lot of truths there, provided that your end time doesn't hover over when it was in an on state. If it does, then the contained information would have to disregard that data. The next column is state time percent. This tells me the percentage of time it was off, percentage of time it was on. Now, if we look at that same information, if it were contained, all that off information was disregarded towards the beginning of my 2:30 and towards the end of the 2:45 mark. So in reality, it was closer to, if we were containing it, 75 seconds versus the 85 seconds that it was in an off state, because it has to truly have cycled into an off state and then be contained during a proper on-off cycle. Again, the ons will not change unless my end time focused while it was in an on state. Then that information would have to be disregarded. There are other columns in here that I could have chosen to focus on contained as well. Perhaps a contained state count. And with a contained state count selected, you actually see that it didn't look at when the concentrate valve was in an off state initially. It has to truly transition to off rather than already have been off. So thank you very much for watching this video on Historian Client and statistics with discrete tags. In this video, we learned a little bit about a concept called contained, but we also learned how the Historian Client query can access the statistical information of our discrete tags, such as how long was a valve open or a valve closed? How many times did it cycle? Stay tuned for more videos on the Wonderware Historian and Wonderware Historian Client. Thank you.